Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Rare Book Room. My name is Heroine, and I help direct events here at the Strand. For a little bit of history, the Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, the Strand is a sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. Under Nancy, the Strand is not only surviving in an increasingly competitive and unsure environment, but it is thriving. The Strand continues to famously hold over 18 miles of used, new, and rare books, and now hosts near 400 events a year. In large part, this is thanks to all of you. Without our loyal community of book lovers, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, I'm excited to welcome Sarah Kozloff and to celebrate the release of her newest fantasy novel, A Queen in Hiding. Sarah holds an endowed chair as a professor of film history at Vassar College. Before becoming a professor, she worked in the film industry, and she brings cinematic eye to the sweeping saga of the Nine Realms series, and that we will see in 3 more books in the coming months. Joining her to discuss her work is S.A. Chakraborty. Gosh darn it. Christina Orlando. I was so close. Shannon is the author of the best-selling Endowed. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I practiced, I swear. She did. Which has been compared to the George R.R. Song of Fire and Ice series and garnered accolades from the Library Journal, Vulture, The Verge, and many others. Christina is the book editor and publicity coordinator for Tor.com, as well as a writer with bylines at Electric Literature, Glam Dem, Them, Adroit Journal, and Book Riot. They're the winner of Spotify's Sound Up Grant for People of Color in Podcasting, and their first audio drama will debut later this year. I couldn't be more excited to have all 3 of them here. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming them and A Queen in Hiding to the Strand.
Hi. Can everybody, is this okay? Cool. So I'm so excited to be here with Sarah and Shannon. I want to start off by talking to Sarah. 4 books in 4 months. How and what and are you a witch?
My students have always thought I was a witch. Right? I mean, there are a lot of them here. Come on. Cruella, I have been called at times. What happened was that even more than a witch, I was a total novice.
Yeah.
I literally didn't know that you wrote 1 book at a time. I thought you wrote the whole story. Mm-hmm. And so I did. And then when I got an agent, she said, this is interesting. You have all 4 books. And I said, yeah. And then when she sold it to Tor, my brilliant editor at Tor, Jennifer Gunnels, said, well, we can do something interesting with all 4 books. We can do what's called rapid publication. So we did spend quite a few months, years revising, but then they were all ready, and it was the production department had to scurry, but 4 books in 4 months.
And how are you feeling about that?
Hi. I mean, the one disadvantage, and maybe Shannon can comment on this, is that I don't get the benefit of feedback. It's not as if people say, well, book 1 was really good, but I would really liked a little more X, and then I could do that in book 2. I'm sorry, guys, I cannot change. Book 2, book 3, or book 4. It is what it is.
And they are great as is, so I think we're okay. And then I was going to ask Shannon, do you have any advice for the journey up ahead as someone who is just about to finish your series?
So looking at her publication schedule, it stressed me out. I was like, I don't even know this poor woman, but I'm looking at this and I'm getting hives from reading it online. It's interesting. I did the complete opposite of that because I was also a novice and remained a novice, and then hadn't written my 2nd book when my 1st book came out, and didn't really know how my 3rd book was going to end, and then had people reading it and was just and sending me via email, Goodreads, DMs, everything, their opinions, their very, very firm opinions on how it should end in all matter of ways. And that was a little hard to get it out of my head while I was writing. So.
Yeah. No, yeah, I haven't had that feedback. So for better or worse, it is my vision.
Better.
I think you'll be okay. So your background is in film studies. You were in film for a really long time. Were you picturing this like a film? And if so, who would direct it and who would you cast?
You know, I did picture it as a film. There are certain chapters that I saw as scenes, that I saw as shots. I certainly haven't chosen a director. I think it belongs as a television series if it were to be adapted, because it's not really like feature material. And I don't know TV directors as well as movie directors. There's only one character whom I have cast. Okay. And that is a minor character, a very wise magistrate who administers the Green Isles. And her name is Destra. And I would like Emma Thompson to play her. She's the only, other than that, I mean, like with Game of Thrones, the casting was with unknown people at the time, and then they turned out to be great. So you let casting directors take care of the casting.
So Shannon, rumor has it that you baked all of the recipes that are in your book. So now that we're talking about hobbies and backgrounds, how did that start? Was it food first or the book first? And how do you feel like your love for baking ties in with your process?
I like that ties in with the process. Like there's some sort of like actual thought involved in this. No, I have a great affection for history, and I have a great affection for culinary history in particular. And in the area I study and the area that inspires the book, the medieval Middle East, there are a lot of cookbooks left over, and there is sort of a preservation of this courtly culture of recipe competitions. You weren't a good prince if you didn't have the best chefs in your kitchen and that they were better than that guy's chef. And it's also a preservation of earlier pre-Islamic Persian recipes, and I just love all of that. So I try to recreate what I can, which is the best way to look at a lot of these recipes and cookbooks is they were clearly written for people who know what they're doing. They're like your grandmother's cookbook. They're like, take a pinch of this and a pinch of this and do it like, churn until done. So I like doing it, and we've been able to include a couple of the recipes in one of the books, and writing feast scenes, like adding magic to this is just, I can't believe I get paid to do that. But it's a lot of fun, although I think I may have also irritated people who look for exact recipes, because when we were putting together some of the recipes for Kingdom of Copper, and I wrote them out, the copy editor was just like, you can't say, and from 2 to 5 cups, or like until it's a paste. They're like, you need times and measurements. Like, they didn't have times and measurements. But it's been fun. It's kind of like a decompressing way to kind of work with the book.
So both of your books feature very incredible women. And we're in a point right now when readers seem to be craving female characters that are not just strong, but are complicated and maybe a little bit messy, and not always, pretty princesses. We like complex women. When you were writing, what was important to you about bringing all aspects of femininity to the page, and how did you go about crafting a complex female heroine?
Well, first of all, my main character, Cerúlia, she's not perfect. She starts as kind of a spoiled brat, and she has a very long character arc over the whole 4 books. And she ends up in surprising places. But it was also very important to me that she not be a killer or a fantastic warrior, because so many fantasies, and even so many female-centered fantasies now, they whip out their knives and kill everybody. And I wasn't interested in that. But also, I wanted to surround Cerúlia with binders of women. Different kinds of women, older women, young women, girlfriends, sisters, mothers, people who were cranky, people who were wise, right? So that there isn't just one female character who carries the burden of representation of the whole gender. So there are quite a number of different models of women in the Nine Realms.
Yeah, you know, when I first saw that question, I was trying to think about it. And, you know, it's kind of the idea of like, you know, anytime you ask a group of people who doesn't always get to see themselves in literature, it's how did you go about crafting it? And it's like, well, we're people, you know, it's not like we're just like this segment of people. You know, and people are messy and people are complicated. And when you're crafting any characters, I think you want to make them as nuanced and real as possible. And it's interesting because when City of Brass was the first book I ever wrote, and I did not know what I was doing. And I think I wasn't even really in conversation so much with some of these ideas about women in fantasy. And I actually think I needed to improve on it. And when I wrote my second book, I really tried to add more women to the fray and to really feel like I had a bigger mix of, okay, we have a character who's a doctor, we have a character who's a mother, we have a character who's a warrior, we have lots of different ways. And also not just having characters, but in sort of investigating female space and female institutions, what it would have actually looked like to be a royal woman in this era, and the ways that you wouldn't have power in some ways, but other ways you would, and you'd act through that. The way you could transgress that, the way it would limit you. So I think it was just kind of filling out the space and making room for nuance is really sort of the best way to do it.
So the flip side of having incredible women at the center of these novels is that there's always men who do try to undermine them or subvert them in certain ways, who are afraid of their power. How do you go about creating a nemesis, creating a worthy nemesis, and contrast to that, how do you go about creating a worthy love interest?
Well, in terms of, I can answer the second part easier. A worthy love interest is someone who will let a woman grow to her full potential, who will never try to bring her down or make her be less than she could be. And that's something that happens throughout the Nine Realms. The nemesis, there are men who are nemesis and there are women who are nemesis, and it's just that they have their own goals. They have different goals, and their goals clash with the main characters. So it's not that they are. There's no Sauron in the Nine Realms. There are people who need different things, and Cerúlia is in the way, and they have no compunction about taking her out. But they're not the epitome of evil.
So when I was writing The City of Brass, I felt like I was trying to do a lot of things, especially when it came to female characters, male characters, and the depiction of gender, is that I was very conscious that as I was writing, this fictional fantasy, I was also a Muslim writer writing a fantasy specifically and intimately tied to Islamic history. And I wanted to be careful and correct and also, I guess, celebratory in a way in how I presented it. And because I know everybody has their misconceptions about, they're like, oh, women in the Middle East in the medieval era, they were just all, under burqas and whatever, that's the right region. And I wanted to really just be like, that's not true. It's, women all throughout history have come up with ways to make rich lives for themselves. I was always very interested in female healers and female physicians in the era, so I wanted to show some of that. But I wanted to show some of the limitations. And when I was crafting sort of my villain character, I really wanted, the first time Nahri is sort of put in her place as a woman is at the end when he basically crudely reminds her, is like, I can ruin your reputation. You're not going to pay the same price, thank you, my love, You're not going to pay the same price as a man for this rumor. And it was meant, I saved that moment and that line and that feeling for this sort of villainous turn. When it comes to love interests, I think my publicist is gonna like jump up at some point and be like, stop talking! So this is not particularly romantic, but I don't believe in soulmates or one true love, and I don't really like, it can show up in fiction. I'm not one for rules in books, but I wanted to show a woman who throughout, because it takes place over years of her life, has different needs and has different desires, and that's okay. That this is what was normal for women of the period. That if you were a royal woman, you were going to make a marriage alliance with a virtual stranger. And how would you work that out? Not that it's this scary thing you're taken to the bedchamber and all that nonsense, but like how do you go about crafting an alliance with a man you don't know? Like, can there be room for affection and love and friendship in there? Can there be room for just you're young and having like a little bit of a fling and enjoying that? I really wanted to investigate somebody who could have, I can't say some things in front of my child, could have romantic and physical needs, and that they were well-rounded, and they belonged to her, and it didn't belong to a man necessarily.
So you did touch on your research process. I want to talk a little bit about where that started, what the spark was, what your process was like, because both of these, while they're, very epic fantasies, are very much rooted in history, and there are some elements of reality and how courts work and how gender politics work and class politics work. So what was your research process like? How did you start?
I'm going to take first one. I feel bad.
No, go ahead.
Figure it out.
Thanks.
Whoever feels strongly about
Go for it.
Sure. Okay. So my research project process, that sounds so official, was a little backwards because I did not have a creative writing background, and I actually did the research first because I wanted to go and pursue further academic studies in medieval history. And I graduated into the recession and basically, I'm not recorded, moved to New York City for love without a safety net. And while essentially taking any job I could to survive, I felt lost, and I felt like I had destroyed my career and my life. And I was working as a secretary at the time, and I would go home and I created this magical world that pulled from all of the histories and everything that I loved that I could just escape into. And my way to sort of set it was kind of a game, was to envision the world of jinn. And traditionally, jinn are not really like, your Aladdin big blue guy, but, in Islamic belief and pre-Islamic belief as well, it's said that they are creatures just like humans. They're created from smokeless fire. They can live incredibly long lives, depending on the time, the place. There's a whole slew of stories and folklore that go around them. And for me, someone who always loved history, that was amazing. I was like, here are these quiet, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of all these cities and places that I love to study. So I tried to imagine how they built their world and kind of take what is in existing folklore. We say Suleiman punished them. Well, what happened after that? How if their powers were taken away, if their lives were curtailed in 3,000 years ago, how did they build a new society? How did they build religions, places, cities, kind of being like magpies and stealing from humans? And I imagined a city that would just be like have like minarets thrown next to ziggurats, and nothing would make sense. You'd be like, oh, we stole these books from the Babylonians and we stole these ones from the French, but it would be this sort of great repository of human knowledge. And I started setting little short stories in it and would just create characters, and throughout the years it getting more and more evolved to the point at that point, like, my husband was like, what do you do all the time? You're on your computer. And I showed him, and then he was like, you should show other people. And it quietly became to the point where, like, before I knew it, before I was completely prepared at all, I had a book coming out. And now I'm here with all you fine people.
So I didn't do, when I was first writing those 2,000 pages, I didn't do that much research. I would look things up now and again. It wasn't until actually I was signed with my editor, Jen Gunnels, and she would say, Sarah, you don't know what you're talking about here. And I said, okay, you got me, but I am on a college campus. And if you want research, I can get you research. So I had the librarians. I would go to all of my colleagues in geology. I would send these strange emails to, there's someone in biology who studies sea life, and John, which sea mammal is strong enough to carry a woman on its back? And
No spoilers, though.
No spoilers. And then Jen said I was particularly weak in my battle knowledge. Guilty. But so I got a colonel from West Point. So, then I went to the source, I went to the books, I did my research wherever it was lacking. But sort of after the arc of the story, I didn't create the world first.
I don't recommend it.
Everyone has their own process, Shen. I created the story first, and then I filled in the details of the world. Yeah.
Great. I mean, using your resources. The women in these stories have capabilities that one might not necessarily think of when we think of like magic powers. Like they don't fly. Nahri can sense sickness and has a great aptitude for language. Cerúlia talks to animals. So how did you go about, where did those things come from, and what do you think it says about their personalities?
Oh. Well, I mean, I think the dream of talking to animals is a fairly common dream.
My head snapped up.
I mean, it figures in many folktales and in many fantasies, and it's also very dear to those of us who have pets and really love our animals. So that I think that was there from the beginning. But it also marked a certain separation of Cerúlia from the rest of the world, because I think it's in a Robin Hobb book that if you become too close to animals, you start losing your ability to relate to people. And so I really wanted to explore both the companionship that animals offer, but also the loneliness that comes with relating to animals more than people. But one thing that was fun is that, she's a princess in a matriarchal realm. I kept having to tell everybody, it is not a kingdom, it is not a kingdom, it is a queendom. And all of the queens have a magic talent. So they're not all able to speak to animals, but they all have their own magic talent. And that was just fun, creating what they could do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I always knew I wanted to work with medicine when I began crafting the character of Nahri, because I was interested in the history of medicine, because I was working in a doctor's office while also putting my husband through medical school. So, you work with what you know. But I wanted to do it too because we have this idea of magical healers, and sometimes it's like, they wave their hands and everything is fine. And that's not what medicine is. That's not what taking care of people is. I mean, sometimes your patients are awful people and they're trying. Sometimes you're going to make mistakes. You might kill somebody. So I really wanted to show I wanted to show the struggle of that you would be practicing and practicing and practicing. That would be your life, just as it is, for physicians nowadays. And, the idea when I was working with Nahri's character, I wanted somebody who wanted to fix things. Not just sort of, I'd like to be a politician, and that's its own struggle, but I wanted her whole personality to be about, I just want to fix this and find concrete ways to do this and fill my head with knowledge and take care of people, but maybe we also, make a good coin on the side. So I always knew, that was what I wanted to investigate, sort of the idea of magical healing, because magical healing is also kind of creepy and awful. It's, where is the line between, you're bringing somebody back from the dead who maybe should stay dead, so I wanted to kind of play with a lot of things there.
It seems like there's always upsides and downsides.
Yes,
and that's what
to
makes
magical
things
abilities.
interesting.
Yes.
Both of you wrote very long epic fantasy series, and there's very complex plots. There's a lot of political intrigue. So when you're writing, are you plotting all that out? How do you make sure to leave breadcrumbs in the beginning for things that are going to play out later on? Or was this just like you did it, they call it like pantser versus plotter? Did you just like go for it and then that's just how it came out? Or was that, were you meticulous about planning those things out?
Well, several things. One, I am a news fanatic, so I was watching all through the 7 years process. I'm watching the news, and some chapters and some plot lines are, coded allegories of what I'm seeing going on right around me. And I couldn't help it. I'm so involved with the news and outrages and things. It goes in the book. I knew the end. I knew the last chapter of the last book, which is lucky because I'm not George R.R. Martin, right? But how I was going to get there. Someone used a term I found a little bit more polite than pantser. He said, "Oh, Sarah, you're a full-on discovery writer."
That one and Gardner. Gardner is also nice way to say it.
So I outlined nothing. I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and then sometimes I revised, and sometimes I cut and cut and cut. But I was really lucky because I had all 4 books. So I could go back and add a breadcrumb to book 1 that's going to pay off at the end of book 4. And I can't imagine the frustration of writing book 3 and wishing you could go back and put that breadcrumb in book 1.
It's interesting. In terms of pacing, I always wanted my books to feel like somebody stepped into a net and didn't realize it. That sort of the threads come together closer and closer and closer, and then like 100 pages at the end just snaps up. But in terms of keeping things together, I am very much, I like the pantser, Gardner, discover, is that I think everybody has different ways of doing this, but to me, I always feel like you can create very character-driven stories if you don't hold yourself to an outline. If you sort of say, I know my world, and I know my characters, throw them into this and see where that lays, what they would say, how they would act. In order to kind of keep it all together and have those breadcrumbs, I tried to stick more with themes. The themes of found families. I always knew the 3rd book was going to end in certain ways when I started the 1st book, so I could throw those breadcrumbs in there. So it was found families was one. I really wanted to examine sort of the historical roots of religions and folklore and sort of the idea of pre-Islamic folklore that got internalized into ideas of the jinn and sort of the American gods idea of, you have these forgotten creatures from a different time and place. So I think by keeping some themes consistent, being like, I would like to choose this, you're laying out your groundwork to come back and tie knots off. And as much as, I'm not really an outliner, it was so satisfying writing the 3rd book and going, I have waited to write that for 10 years. I can't wait to see somebody yell at me on Twitter about it. It was very, very nice to kind of pull it all together. It's a very satisfying feeling.
And Sarah, were there themes that you were thinking about at the beginning, or just going for it?
No, of course. Well, one of the main themes, I've got a crush on Aragorn. and
Don't we all?
Yeah, and Viggo Mortensen. But Aragorn too. But so, one of the main themes was when Aragorn lives half of his life as Strider, and he's not recognized for who he is. So this idea of living in anonymity and hiding your true identity was
The Queen in Hiding.
Was a major through line. I also have found families. I wonder if you know, but other questions of female friendships, male friendships. You know, the sort of transforming power of human relationships.
Not to do like a hard switch, there are some interesting class dynamics in both of your series. We talked a little bit about political intrigue, which means there are royals, there are, I don't want to say peasants, like regular people, but there's also different races going on. There's lots of warring countries. How do you go about dealing with the way that people from different classes interact with each other and what those interactions look like when they're face to face?
Yeah, I wanted to look at, I mean, in a couple of different ways. One, when I have the book start out, you know, I have Nahri is essentially a beggar and a con artist, and that background that stays with her forever. You know, we have our in fantasy, listen, we get a lot of lost orphans who are living on the streets. And I really wanted to kind of show, no, when you go to the kingdom and you're the lost heir, you never lose that. That's a very difficult way to grow up. That would impact you for the rest of your life. But I also wanted to show some class dynamics, and when I kind of have these characters, because Nahri becomes privileged in a sense. So she gets to the second book and she's still holding herself as, you know, I was this downtrodden person, and when she meets another woman, you know, another healer from that, no, you're not. Like, you're the oppressor now. Are you kidding me? Like, you know, like, address your past, address your actions. So I always wanted, when I examine class dynamics, because I do feel I had always wanted to include a character. I don't want to spoil it, but I didn't get to do it, but I wanted to include a character from the one group that is essentially the most downtrodden. And so when I was working with them, I wanted to make sure they had their own agency. And they, you know, it didn't feel like they were just a foil for the little rich girl, the prince or whatever. They had their own agency, and it was very much, you know, they're there to call out, in a way, the idea of princes and you thinking you're the hero and you're going to save us. So I wanted to, you know, make sure that I had fully fleshed out kind of class discussions there.
I have a lot of characters. When they do the style sheet at the publishing house, I have 600 names. Now, some of them are dogs, and and some of them are horses, and some of them are just made-up authors of books and things like that. But there are a lot of different people, and there are a lot of different people from every rung of society. And many of them are point-of-view characters. There's a shepherd, a 9-year-old shepherd, who's a point of view. I mean, he's not privileged. There's a nursemaid. There's servants. There's a little bit of upstairs, downstairs. Yes? Tension in Queen in Hiding. So the best way I knew how to deal with class was to give people their own voice and their own aims and their own needs. So they're not all, you know, happily serving the prince and princess and, you know, just loyal forever. They have their own lives. And that was very important to me.
It's interesting you mentioned that Nahri starts off as a beggar and then is suddenly elevated. Cerúlia does the opposite, where she starts off as a princess, is surrounded by people who take care of her, and who she's very sheltered.
Yeah.
And she does
Privileged,
the opposite
spoiled,
journey,
bossy.
where she has to sort of learn how to be like a person a little bit.
Learn how to do chores and wash dishes and carry water and fit into a village school and there's a scene I really like is when she has to help with the harvest, and she finds it grueling and really hard. So yeah, she does do that opposite.
Beautiful. Was there a scene that stood out for you that sort of encapsulates that journey that Nahri takes?
One that doesn't spoil things. It's hard. I'm trying to think. Because the first one that comes to mind is, and I can say it a little, in the third book, now she's made this journey. She is this cast out princess in a way, and she meets someone sort of like her in the beginning, and just is like, "Are you kidding me? Like, I know your story." And it's that moment of kind of reclaiming her story and just, no, you don't. You don't know who I am. Like, I'm like, and it felt like it completed her arc in a way when she kind of owns both sides of her.
That's beautiful.
Sorry.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the elements. There's a lot of fire and a lot of water. I know that the fire comes out of history and your research the extensive research that you did. How did you, I'm going to say, weave those elements into your story? Where did the idea to center your society around water come from? What were some of the ways that water operates that really, inspired you? How did that work when you were crafting your story?
I'm pretty sure that the fact that my main kingdom worships a spirit of fresh water comes from my reading the news and from my knowledge that we are using up our water resources, and we're all, water is going to be the most precious commodity in the next 10, 20 years. And there are places on the world right now that are running, Cape Town, South Africa, running out of water. And so it seemed to me that I wanted to celebrate, fresh drinking water of life, and that's where it came from. Yeah.
So I mostly tried to look at the idea of elemental races in a way that pulling both from folklore and it kind of expanding on it in a ways. I have essentially these four major groups of people, which are, humans, it's, humans of dust, of the earth. The jinn are of fire, the married are of water, and the peris are of air. And I try to both imagine ways that would create their society, that the married are almost a collective. They all swim together. They can't lie to each other. They're almost, if you've seen Deep Space Nine, I very much was like Odo. And that would very much, they would despise the other ones for that. They might look upon the jinn and see, you can lie to each other. You're these deceptive, burning, destructive creatures. The peris, that they are high and mighty. They can fly up to listen to the whispers of paradise. How would that create them? So they don't interfere, except when they do, because they always know better. So I wanted to kind of play with that idea and sort of sort some of the other creatures that we talk about in history and folklore into that idea.
So you mentioned earlier there was a character that you wanted to include, but you didn't quite get the chance to. For Sarah, is there anything that you wanted to include that didn't quite make the cut, or that
lots of things. And since Jen is in the audience, I might as well. I had a character I really liked. Her name was Gretna, and she was good with a knife, and she was going to assassinate Cerúlia if she went to a certain realm. And so Gretna had many point of view chapters. I liked Gretna. And Jen said, and Gretna went goodbye with hardly a whimper. She's gone. She's still in my head a little bit, but she's not in the book.
It's your spinoff.
I wrote my entire second book from a different point of view that got cut and replaced with another one.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very stressful. It was 1,000% the right choice, but yeah, it was like 80, I don't even want to remember how many words rewritten, so yeah.
Okay, I got a couple of quick fire questions.
Okay.
Night or day?
I'm sorry?
Night or day?
Day.
Dawn.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Oh, that's so hard. Tea. Yeah.
Favorite kind of dessert?
Chocolate.
Currently, sticky toffee pudding.
Yeah. Essential part of your self-care routine?
Coffee.
I don't have a self-care routine. I'm here with a 6-year-old on my
Fair. Touche. Last TV show you binge watched?
Kingdom. Zombies in I think it's like 17th or 18th century Korea. It's very good.
We just finished a season of Outlander.
Yeah.
And we just started, I forgot what it's called. It's got Joel Kinnaman in it. It's alternates. It's about the moon. The Russian.
Altered Carbon. Altered Carbon?
No. For All Mankind, it's called. Yes. It's about the Russians get to the moon first, so it's alternate history.
Last thing you read that you loved?
It's a very nerdy answer, but there's a great book I read about that was a medieval, like sort of an Islamic history of the Crusades, and it was very fascinating and well written, and I have no life, I'm sorry.
You have a vibe, it's good. Stick to your thing.
Well, I did just read your book, too. And it was terrific.
Okay, this is my favorite question to ask. What advice would you give your 14-year-old self?
It's going to be okay.
Learn how to handle stress now. Because otherwise, it will handle you.
All right, now we'll open it up to the audience. If anybody has any questions. Okay.
So fantasy is a very particular genre with lots of rules. So what rule did you break and why?
You know, I would argue it doesn't really have that many rules. And I don't know if because I came out of this more of a folklore perspective, but I find it curious when we're kind of like fantasy was invented by Tolkien. And it's this idea of the fantastical. I mean, humans have been telling each other stories about magic and monsters and heroes since we've been around, a fireplace, since the dawn of time. So I think I don't know that there are any rules. I think the most exciting thing about fantasy is seeing just how many different ways we can push it.
I think it may not have rules, but it certainly has common tropes that you see again and again. And one I deliberately broke was that the idea that Cerúlia didn't know her parentage. Cerúlia knows who she is. She may not be living in the palace anymore, but she absolutely knows who her mother was and who her father was, and it's none of that, oh, you're the lost heir of the king, right? Yeah.
Where am I going?
Okay. Hello and thank you. My name is Sasha, and I'm currently writing a book. I started writing a year ago, like bits and pieces. It was like texting on my Gmail account. For you guys were like over 1,000 of words. What apps did you use besides using a word processor? Like Word's 2010. What did you use?
I only used Word. I tried Scrivener, and I just didn't trust it. I'm not really great with technology, and I just always put it in Word. And you can write notes, really whatever works for you. Like my biggest advice to people who are just starting out writers is find a way to get enjoyment from it, and whatever works, even if it seems like you're like, why am I putting this on Post-its? People write on their phones on the subway, people record things to themselves, like whatever lets you kind of let that creativity flow and work is the right method to use.
I agree with that, but I do use Scrivener.
You are a witch.
I told you. This is serious advice. Whatever you do, back up your writing. Every 20 minutes. I mean, do not let yourself go through that heartbreak of losing even a half hour's work of, right? Because it's hard to get it down. So I have double backups. In a John Ford film, they called it the belt and suspender approach. So it goes to Dropbox, and it goes onto my Time Machine hard disk. Back up your work.
The positive side is once you do lose something, you will back everything up for the rest of your life.
That's why I write in Google Docs.
Hello.
Hi.
I am a former student of Sarah Kozloff, big fan, and I'm currently a preschool teacher, and I've never not told stories to my students. So I was wondering, what are your favorite forms of folklore, be it fairy tales, oral histories, family legends, jokes, urban legends? When do you find yourself telling stories to people, and how has that figured into your ethic, your ethos as a writer? For both of you guys.
Go first.
I was going to say, I find myself most often relating sort of medieval anecdotes, but not always about folklore, but about real people. Because I find history and real people, not sort of the caliphs and the kings and all that. I find people fascinating. I think, I got asked a question at a panel recently, and they said, what's your biggest difficulty with writing historical fantasy? And I said that people wouldn't believe me if I told some of the things that it comes up with. And I love finding little anecdotes and being able to share them on social media or put them in my book. I think it gets back to the part of me that did want to teach, and I just think there's something very fulfilling about that, about reminding people that all throughout history, wherever we've always been these kind of complicated, messy, but people who want things and desire things.
I am not an expert in mythology. But when I think about storytelling in my life, it's been in the classroom, wasn't it? I would tell the story about the coming of sound. I would tell the story of how Citizen Kane got made. I would tell the story of what happened to the production code. In fact, I would turn every class into a story about, or I would, then I've told some of you these things over the time I met Pauline Kael, right? I mean, I have my favorite group of stories, and I would tell them, but often they had to do with history. Yeah.
I don't think I need this.
Use it for
Posterity.
accessibility. Sorry.
I'm Lois, fan of your books. Now I have a question and a half. So, for first question, you mentioned which fantasy tropes you use and which ones you avoided. Now, is there one that you've seen used a little too much in other books that have been coming out recently? And the other question is kind of a half question for Ms. Chakraborty. Will we get a cookbook based on your trilogy? It worked for George R.R. Martin, so.
I truly think whoever copyrighted just like 3 of my recipes probably wrote a letter to Harper and was just like, do not ever give this woman a cookbook. I would like to. I've been in conversation with some other fantasy authors, like maybe we can put something together sort of for charity one day. Or I'll just throw them out on the website, because I don't know that I would do a cookbook, because that seems very hard and arduous, and I already have to work on another series. But I do enjoy doing it. In terms of tropes that I see a lot, I'm very books are a very objective, experience. You might like something, you might not. But I do wish, and I see this coming out more, but I do wish in fantasy we sort of investigated the hierarchies of power and sort of the systems of oppression that uphold them. And, I started writing about a monarchy, but I was like, let's get this out in there and then blow it up. Spoilers. But so I do like, why does your society look like the way it does? And and how can we work some of that out? I'm not really a big fan of bloodlines without being investigated. I think there's a lot we hold up in stories that it's worth it to kind of pick it apart nowadays.
Okay, I think I'm going to cause trouble. Is that all right? I mean, it's that time of the evening. The fantasy trope that I have totally had enough of is dragons. I'm done. I'm done with dragons. I'm also.
I thought we were going to be friends.
I have a whole blog post about why I hate dragons. The other thing I don't like are these scenes all the time. It's every fantasy book seems to have a sort of harrowing the dead scene where people go underground, the paths of the dead in Tolkien, and everybody's going down in these tunnels and going into hell. Please, let's stay. Let's stay.
Not like a phobia?
I don't want to be up in the air, nor do I want to be under the ground. I want to be on the earth.
How did you get here?
I have my ways.
Again, a witch.
You didn't see it in the green room?
Of course I did. I didn't even see your bag.
But you saw my cat.
Now we're starting rumors. Do we have any other questions?
Oh my goodness.
Let's go in the back.
This one?
No, you meant all the way in the back.
Behind you.
Oh, my bad.
Hi, I'm also a former student of Sarah Kozloff.
I packed the audience.
So I'm wondering how you got your feedback during your writing process, and who did you ask? Was it just your editor? Were you talking with friends and family? And when you weren't sure of a way to go with your story, did you sit with it? Did you talk to people? And when did you know when to take people's comments and when to stick true to your vision? Because as a film student, that's something I think, and a writer, all the above, any creative, something that people struggle with is when to listen to what other people are saying and when to, stick with it.
It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Actually, this was hard for me because I wasn't part of a writing group. I'd never gone to one of those writers' conference, Clarion, whatever. There aren't writers' groups in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I used to beg my family members to read things, and they wouldn't. I did have one close friend. If you look at the dedication, it says, "To Dawn, who believed in this the most." She read all 4 books. Without her, would I have done it? I mean, because there are times when you really need feedback, especially at the beginning parts when you feel most insecure. Later on, when you have your agent and you have your editor, and then you have your copy editor, and you're getting expert feedback, but it's at the beginning where you really need. So my advice to any would-be authors is to find your Dawn, to find friends who will give up that much time and their intelligence to help you.
Shannon, did you have someone like that?
Yes, my husband, which I don't normally recommend. But no, he's been my best friend since we were teenagers, and I'm lucky and blessed that he's very nerdy and very into all the sort of geekdoms that I am. So I think he read 90,000 versions of all of these. Like at a certain point, because I was very shy and I didn't want to publish the books and I had to be kind of pushed, I was like, could you just be me? Like, I know you're not supposed to do that anymore. That was like what you did in like the medieval era when the women weren't allowed to, have it. But I was like, could you just like do this? But no, I mean, I had him read everything, and he was my medical editor, which was like amazing, because when you're writing fantasy, you need to know a lot of things about like how to murder people and how long it would take and the exact methods. But I had a group of friends and a writers group too, actually, the Brooklyn speculative fiction writers. If any of you write spec fic in the city, you should look them up. So it was that feedback and kind of getting, a general idea. The more people you show, I think, especially earlier, you can kind of hit a little bit more of a broader audience.
All right. So books obviously change a lot during edits. I know you guys do rounds and rounds. Is there one scene, at least one scene, that has sort of remained the same or pretty close to the same, regardless of all the edits that you've done, that has sort of been there since the first draft?
Yes. It's a scene in the second book, which I just brought to show off. Here's a little bit of fire for you, and to show you that February 18th. I mean, these are bam. There is a scene in Queen of Raiders that didn't change at all, and it just is what it is. And actually, this was the chapter. I had my book launch last night, and I read that chapter last night in Rhinebeck. Yeah.
So my trilogy changed a lot. Interestingly enough, I feel like the third book ended on a more positive note than I had originally planned. But as much as it changed, there are elements of the end that stayed exactly the same, and that I had been looking forward to writing for so many years. And I, maybe like in another year, like a year after it's out, I can share it. But I cried so much while writing them, because it was just, I had this scene and these people and these moments in my head. This last line, how I always wanted to end the trilogy, and it was nice to kind of see that through.
Does anyone else? There's a couple over here.
So this is going to be the last question.
Cool. Make it a good one. No pressure.
Oh my gosh. All right. Hello, I'm also a former student of...
Hi, Nora.
Hi, Sarah. For someone who is new to the fantasy genre or doesn't necessarily consider themselves as someone who likes fantasy, what would you say to them to kind of get them invested in the genre?
I don't know, because fantasy now it's so broad. There's so many different ways for you to start. My first thought is the book that I'm going to be recommending to everybody, especially New Yorkers, is N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became. Like, if you are a New Yorker, you got to read that book. And it's this contemporary fantasy. It's a very different idea of things. So I think, you kind of look into what other things you like to read. Is there a particular topic or a particular kind of characterization or relationship? And you can find, elements of that in fantasy that you can look up on Goodreads, you can look it up in other writing circles. Like, I think we live in a wealth of books of all types, but also especially in fantasy. I think we live in a little bit of a glory age for fantasy fiction, and there's just so many different ways to enter and enjoy.
Yeah, I would ask, what do you like to read? And then try to find fantasy that incorporates those elements. So if you like historical fiction, there's certain fantasies. If you like romance, there's some very romantic fantasies, Outlander. It depends what you like to read. I have been a little surprised, I have to say. I thought, especially after Game of Thrones, that everybody in the world liked fantasy, and everybody in the world was reading fantasy. And when I've gone up to some people, I'm writing a series, it's a fantasy series. Oh, I don't read fantasy. And I'm like, really? But, genre is a very personal preference. Though I always used to say to some of you in this room, you think you don't like musicals. Let me get you in that class and you will learn better. You think you don't like romantic comedies. Wait. You think you don't like war films or westerns. You just don't know the genre. And with every genre, the more you are a connoisseur, the more meaningful the genre becomes to you.
All right, we'll end it on that. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Sarah and Shannon.
Thank you for coming and out on this like cold night. Whenever people come to winter events, I'm just like, bless you.
That's true. And Sarah will be signing, and please pick up Queen in Hiding, and City of Brass, and Kingdom of Copper, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, everybody.